Oh, the next real Zelda for Nintendo Switch 2 is going to totally blow us away. Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we are talking about the future Zelda on Nintendo Switch 2. I think when you take into consideration some interesting things that have happened as of late, and also historical precedent, it's fairly clear what's going to happen next with Zelda. The next mainline Zelda game, and also perhaps a remake as well, are going to be technical marvels. They are going to showcase what the Switch 2 can do. They're going to be extremely impressive, not just from a visual perspective, but from an overall gameplay perspective as well, and perhaps even this can tie into the story too. I think we have a lot of reason to expect some very impressive special things for the future of Zelda, and that's what I want to dive into today. But before going forward, let me take this moment to point out that I am aiming to reach 50,000 subscribers by the time the Switch 2 launches on June 5th. So if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So let's start this conversation off by mentioning the 2011 tech demo for Nintendo Wii U. We keep coming back to talking about this tech demo because it just looks so good, even now. And I think it's really worth emphasizing here that this technical demonstration was for the Nintendo Wii U back in 2011. We are having this conversation in the year of 2025 as we approach the release for the Nintendo Switch 2. That tech demo looked so good for the time, and even now I still think it looks pretty good. I think Nintendo could easily put together a game that looks like that and better for the Nintendo Switch 2, and in theory, they could have also made something to look even better even on the Switch 1, and the Switch 2 is like 10 times more powerful, at least according to Nvidia, the makers of Switch 2's processor. And so when you really put this into perspective, it kind of becomes kind of crazy when you think about what might be possible on Switch 2. Now I know some people will say, well, yeah, that tech demo looked pretty good, but it was just a tech demo. It wasn't what the Wii U could really do. But then let me point you towards The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. That was the game that Nintendo built for the Wii U. And while Breath of the Wild in a smaller space may arguably not look as good as the tech demo, it still looks pretty good. There are areas that look a lot better, and there's also way more going on in Breath of the Wild than that 2011 tech demo. First off, it's a massive open world, not an enclosed space, so that alone already makes for a huge difference, but everything that was done in Breath of the Wild was extremely impressive. The dynamic weather systems, the physics, and the level of freedom accomplished in this game were revolutionary. These changes were not just a big deal for the future of Zelda, but for the future of open world games in general. And this was accomplished on the Nintendo Wii U. If the Zelda team wanted to, they could have created a game that wasn't open world, that was more linear, maybe more structured, perhaps something like Skyward Sword, for example, back on the Nintendo Wii, or maybe even something more like Metroid Prime 4 today, where it's not focused on being open world, it's more smaller paths, and by doing this you can put together a greater level of fidelity and detail in these smaller spaces. If they had chosen that direction, they probably could have made something to look even better than what we saw in the tech demo from 2011. But I think the crazy thing about this now is that considering what we're going to get with Nintendo Switch 2, I think you can make the argument that the next Zelda game, even the theorized remake, not just the brand new one, but even a theorized remake, could look better than this tech demo. And in the case of the next brand new Zelda after this theorized remake, I think this game not only will look significantly better in a small space, but it can maintain that level of fidelity perhaps in a much larger space with a lot more going on and far better performance. We're talking about a significant leap here. Which brings me to my next point. I've noticed a very interesting standard that Nintendo seems to be showcasing with the Nintendo Switch 2. So if you take a look at every single game announcement for Nintendo Switch 2 that are Nintendo published offerings, you may notice an interesting trend. For the most part, all these games were running at 60 frames per second. A lot of games on Nintendo Switch, even Nintendo published titles, could not run at 60 frames per second while maintaining the level of detail that they had. And perhaps the two titles that are worth most mentioning for this particular discussion are the Switch 2 editions for both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. These are open world games that have a crazy amount of things going on with the physics, the dynamic weather, and so much more, And so of course on Nintendo Switch 1, they could only target 30 frames per second, and the resolution wouldn't be maximizing either. But we see with these Switch 2 editions, a far greater resolution, and they're running at 60 frames per second. Both of them. And I find it interesting that we now have it confirmed that both these games will be running at 60 frames per second on Switch 2, because I've noticed a trend with the more recent Zelda offerings. Echoes of Wisdom ran at 60 frames per second, Link's Awakening Remake ran at 60 frames per second, Skyward Sword HD ran at 60 frames per second. It may be the case that the new standard for Zelda is to run at 60 frames per second, so whenever it comes to what we see next for Zelda, be it a remake or the next new game, I think it might be a reasonable expectation for them to be running at 60 frames per second. This appears to be the new standard. And this new standard may extend beyond just Zelda, but just Nintendo games in general. We're now talking about quality mode still running at 60 frames per second on Switch 2 in the case of Metroid Prime 4, but there's also the performance mode where the game can run at 120 frames per second. The fact that Nintendo is now offering 120 FPS, it might be kind of surprising to see the Zelda team put out a big brand new effort that's only running at 30, just a fourth of the frame rate potential on the console. I'm really starting to think that that's just not going to happen. 60 FPS may really be the new standard for Zelda. But there is a game that was seen during the Switch 2 Direct that is not running at 60 frames per second, and that is Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. And this is why I've been emphasizing on how we're going to have a conversation on the next real Zelda, because Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment isn't a real Zelda game. Now when I say that, I'm not saying it's not part of the Zelda canon, it may be from a story perspective, but it's not a Legend of Zelda game. If it was, they would call it The Legend of Zelda game. They don't. They call it Hyrule Warriors. And it's being made by Koei Tecmo, not Nintendo. And so this 60 FPS standard does not seem to be extending to them. Of course, perhaps they may introduce a performance mode or what have you later on where there is even still a 60 FPS mode for this game. I hope they do, because to be honest, I think the Warriors games kind of need them, and I was disappointed to see that we were going to get a new Warriors game on Switch 2 for Zelda, and it doesn't have an improved frame rate. Now, to be fully forthcoming here, the announcement of Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, even though I theorized we would get this back in 2023, I was actually kind of disappointed to see it announced here in 2025, just because I don't really think we needed that much anymore. Between Breath of the Wild, its DLC, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and Tears of the Kingdom, I feel like we've gone quite a bit of content from this version of Zelda, this art style, these characters. I'm ready to move on to the next big thing, the next era of Zelda. So the fact they put this out there, it's something I wasn't extremely excited about. That said, I may still find myself buying this game because I did still enjoy Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and there may be some interesting lore we can get from this game by exploring the Age of Imprisonment through the eyes of Princess Zelda. But for the sake of this conversation, Age of Imprisonment is the exception. It's not really an indicator of what the future of Zelda is, because it's not a real Zelda game. It is a Hyrule Warriors game. And it's not being made by Nintendo or the Zelda team, even though they may be approving of some different things and overseeing the overall project. When it comes to the real Zelda games though, when we take a look at how the Zelda team has improved game by game, we can see a clear advancement in technology here that is shocking. Skyward Sword did some very cool things for the time of the Nintendo Wii, but as we discussed earlier, Breath of the Wild was revolutionary, and Tears of the Kingdom, made specifically for the Nintendo Switch, a console that's a little bit more powerful than the Wii U, not significantly, but a little bit more powerful, they were able to do some substantial things that I was quite shocked they were able to accomplish. The fact that they were able to maintain essentially the same world from Breath of the Wild, but with a little bit more detail, but also integrating caves all throughout the world, and these chasms that shoot down to an entire other open world section, and then there's also the sky with all these different sky islands. When you account for these 3 different realms and also the caves, and you being able to explore and enter all these areas seamlessly, It's kind of mind-blowing to think about how they were able to expand on the world in that way, that seamless transition throughout it all. But then when you also stack on top of that, that it's maintaining all these different physics and weather systems all that were already established with Breath of the Wild, but then all the different insane abilities, such as Ultra Hand and Recall, where you can put together all these insane creations or reverse the times for different objects, or even ascend where you can shoot through the surface for so many different areas. It's mind-boggling that they're able to get this all working together, but then it even still goes beyond that, because what they're also able to accomplish with Tears of the Kingdom is having different companion characters running alongside you, multiple at a time, while also being able to join a small infantry, help them out as they engage in battle with a horde of enemies in an encampment. And then there's explosions and all sorts of things going on. All of this can be done, and that's just kind of crazy that they were able to accomplish this. They were able to pull this off on the Nintendo Switch. And so when you think about that, when you think about how much they were able to improve upon the tech and everything you can do between these different Zelda games, what will they be able to do on the Nintendo Switch 2, where we're seeing a substantial leap in technology here? The Switch was only a little bit more powerful than the Wii U, and look at what they were able to do between Breath and Tears. What might we see on the Switch 2? What sorts of crazy ideas or visuals or physics are we going to see in this next game? And I think it's important to highlight that these changes we might see in the next Zelda game, like with even more crazy physics, other crazy gameplay mechanics, and all sorts of amazing things happening seamlessly in an open world, perhaps at 60 frames per second with a greater level of fidelity and detail that far surpasses even what we saw from the tech demo, on a larger scale. Like, while all that may be the case, when we start talking about the theorized remake that we may see before this next brand new Zelda, I don't think we should be expecting all of that. I do, however, think it's reasonable to maybe expect some substantial visual improvements while also maintaining 60 frames per second. Now, we've already talked about a lot why I think a Ocarina of Time remake seems very likely to come out for the 40th anniversary. If you're more curious on that, if you haven't heard my theories on it, I'll put that video in the iCard. But I do think once we see this remake, that again is just a theory, but it's one I feel pretty good about, it is going to be something that's going to be a visual treat, because one of the big ideas behind putting out a remake like this would be to showcase the abilities of the console to an extent, to tease what might be possible on the Switch 2 once the Zelda team has more time to build a totally new, from the ground up effort on this new console. It would be a teaser from a visual performance perspective. Maybe they might make some changes to the gameplay, but ultimately, given that this would be a remake, this would be about modernizing a prior Zelda game. I think it would be for Ocarina of Time, and this would look really special. So if and when we finally see that, it's going to be an amazing time. I look forward to this possibility at some point in the year of 2026. Fingers crossed. But overall, I'm just excited to move on to this new era of Zelda. For this year, we may be able to enjoy the Switch 2 editions for Breath and Tears, and we're also going to be getting Age of Imprisonment in the winter. But after that, I think it's very clear that what's next is going to be different. We're going to move on to a new, more advanced art style for The Legend of Zelda, and we're going to see new iterations for these different characters, and perhaps some new ones as well. I look forward to the new. I look forward to this next generation, and I'm highly curious what sorts of crazy gameplay innovations that they are going to come up with next with this vastly improved hardware. I like to bring this up a lot, but I feel like there's a lot of opportunity with the mouse controls. Could they offer some sort of mouse controls in this next Zelda game? I think that's actually a pretty reasonable expectation. You look at the motion controlled aiming in Breath of the Wild and Tears, I don't see why they can't use the mouse controls as an option for aiming around. And I also think about all the different things we could do with Ultra Hand in Tears of the Kingdom, and how we'll be moving different objects in different ways. The extra speed and precision of the mouse controls could probably improve that kind of experience significantly. So there's just so much potential for the next new Zelda on Switch 2. It's mind-blowing. But what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.